My name is Olivia, and I'm 34 years old. I grew up in a small coastal town in Oregon, where the air always carried the scent of salt and pine, and the horizon glowed pink at dusk. My dad, Michael, was a mechanic who fixed fishing boats, and my mom, Linda, worked as a receptionist at the town hall. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough. As a kid, I thought my family was everything a family should be. Mom would let me help her bake oatmeal cookies on Sundays, flour dusting my nose as we laughed. Dad would take me and my brother Nathan, who's 3 years older, to skip rocks on the beach. On summer evenings, the four of us would sit on our creaky porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky, the sound of waves crashing like a lullaby. I believed that's what love looked like. That's what home was. But everything changed one rainy winter afternoon when I was 10. Nathan, 13 at the time, was in a car accident. He was riding his bike home from school when a pickup truck swerved, hitting him. He broke his leg, his arm, and 3 ribs and spent weeks in the hospital. I still remember that night. Mom sobbing so hard her voice cracked. Dad staring blankly at the hospital floor, his hands trembling. I clung to my grandma Beatrice, who wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "It'll be okay, sweetheart." But it wasn't okay. Nothing was ever the same after that day. Before the accident, I felt like I belonged. Nathan and I used to race each other to the pier, collecting seashells and trading them like treasures. He'd tease me for being slow, but he'd always wait for me to catch up. Mom would braid my hair before bed, humming old folk songs. Dad would lift me onto his shoulders so I could touch the low-hanging branches of the cedar tree in our yard. Those moments felt like they'd last forever. But when Nathan came home from the hospital, it was like I stopped existing. The house revolved around him, his recovery, his pain, his needs. Mom quit her job to care for him, her eyes always red from exhaustion. Dad worked double shifts to cover medical bills, coming home too tired to talk. I didn't blame them at first. Nathan was hurt and I was fine. I told myself I could wait for things to go back to normal. But normal never came back. The cookies stopped. The stories stopped. The porch swing sat empty. I'd try to show Mom my drawings from school, hoping for a smile, but she'd be too busy checking Nathan's bandages. Dad would nod absently when I told him about a good grade, then ask if Nathan had taken his meds. I started to feel like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around so I wouldn't disturb the fragile balance. All I wanted was for them to see me again, to remember I was there. But the more I tried, the more invisible I became. After Nathan's accident, our house changed. It wasn't just the constant smell of antiseptic or the hum of the humidifier in his room. It was the way my parents' eyes never left him, like he was the only thing keeping the world from falling apart. Mom would sit by his bed for hours, adjusting his pillows, reading him books, her voice soft and patient in a way I hadn't heard since I was little. Dad would come home from the docks, grease still smudged on his hands, and go straight to Nathan, asking about his physical therapy. I'd linger in the doorway, hoping for a glance, a word, anything. But I was like a ghost, unseen unless I made too much noise. At first I thought it was temporary. Nathan was hurt and they were scared. I'd wait it out. But weeks turned into months, and the focus on him only grew. Nathan got new clothes because his old ones didn't fit over his casts. He got a shiny new Walkman to keep his spirits up. When he managed to walk across the room without crutches, Mom clapped like he'd won a marathon. Meanwhile, I brought home a perfect score on my 5th-grade science project, a model of a coral reef I'd spent weeks gluing together. I held it up to Mom, heart pounding, hoping she'd pin it to the fridge like she used to. She glanced at it, then turned to Dad. "Did you pick up Nathan's pain meds?" Dad nodded, then looked at me. "Nice work, Olivia," he said, his voice flat, like he was checking a box. No hug, no smile, just that. I tried harder. I joined the spelling bee, won first place, and practiced my speech for the school play until my throat was sore. But every effort crashed against the same wall. Nathan. "Nathan's got a checkup today," Mom would say. "Nathan's feeling down," Dad would add. "Be quiet, Olivia, your brother needs rest." The worst was when I caught a cold. Mom packed my bag and drove me to Grandma Beatrice's house an hour away, saying, "We can't risk Nathan getting sick." At first, I loved those visits. Beatrice made cinnamon toast and let me curl up with her old botany books, their pages yellowed and smelling of dust. But soon I realized I wasn't sent away for a treat. I was sent away because I was a threat, a walking germ who might hurt their precious son. What hurt more than being ignored was how they rewrote me. "Olivia's so independent," Mom told the neighbors when I got into the gifted program. "She understands Nathan needs us more." I didn't understand. I was a kid who wanted her parents to notice her. I'd lie awake at night, the salty ocean breeze slipping through my window, wondering what I'd done wrong. Had I been too loud? Too needy? I started staying in my room, the one place Nathan wasn't allowed because of the lavender sachets Mom said irritated his allergies. It became my sanctuary. I'd sit cross-legged on the floor, flipping through Beatrice's books, sketching ferns and wildflowers, losing myself in their quiet strength. Plants didn't need applause to grow, they just did, even in the harshest soil. But there was something else, something I never told anyone. The day of Nathan's accident, I was with him. We were racing home on our bikes, laughing when I saw the truck swerving. I yelled for him to stop, but he didn't listen, pedaling faster. I tried to grab his sleeve, but he pulled away, and then, crash. Mom and Dad never asked what happened. They assumed I'd been careless letting him ride ahead. That guilt clung to me like damp sand, heavy and cold. They never knew I'd tried to save him, and they never asked. By the time I was 13, I'd learned to be invisible. I stopped expecting Mom to notice my report cards or Dad to ask about my day. Nathan was the sun, and I was just a speck of dust caught in his orbit. He didn't have to try to shine. Every limp he took was a victory, every smile a reason for Mom to bake his favorite brownies. When he got a C on a math test, Dad framed it as proof he's fighting through pain. My straight A's? They were just expected. "Olivia's fine," Mom would say. "She doesn't need the attention." But I did. I needed it so badly it ached, like a bruise I couldn't touch. I couldn't keep begging for their love, so I found a way to survive. At 15, I walked into Rose's nursery, a small plant shop on the edge of town, and asked for a job. Rose, the owner, was a wiry woman with soil-stained hands and eyes that saw right through you. She didn't ask why a teenager wanted to sweep floors and water ferns after school. She just handed me an apron and said, "Work hard, and you'll make something of yourself." Those words were a lifeline. For the first time, someone believed I was worth something. I'd show up after school, tie my hair back, and lose myself in the rhythm of pruning leaves and mixing soil. The plants didn't judge me. They didn't care if I was quiet or if Nathan was the family's star. They just grew, and I grew with them. Rose taught me more than how to care for orchids or spot root rot. She saw me, the real me. When I stayed late to reorganize the seed trays, she'd slip me a cup of chamomile tea and say, "You've got a gift, Olivia. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I clung to that. At home I was a shadow, but at the nursery I was someone. I started reading every botany book I could find, sneaking them from Grandma Beatrice's attic. I'd trace diagrams of plant cells, memorizing how they thrived in silence, turning sunlight into life. It felt like a secret language, one that belonged just to me. Nathan's life was different. He didn't have to work, didn't have to study hard. Mom would clear his dishes, Dad would buy him new sneakers to boost his confidence. Every event of his, a school play, a soccer game where he sat on the bench, was a family affair, complete with cheers and homemade signs. Me? I got a distracted "good job" when I won the regional science fair for a project on native wildflowers. Mom was too busy slicing apples for Nathan because he needs the vitamins. I stopped telling them anything. I did my homework at the nursery, scribbling equations between stacks of clay pots, the smell of damp earth keeping me grounded. Senior year, I applied to 15 colleges. I didn't tell a soul. I wrote my essays during breaks at the nursery, hunched over Rose's rickety desk. She'd read them, her glasses slipping down her nose, and say, "Write what hurts, kid. That's what makes it real." I poured my heart into those pages, not about Nathan or my parents, but about the resilience of plants, how they grow through cracks in concrete. I applied for every scholarship I could find, from merit-based to first generation. I saved every penny from my nursery job, stuffing coins into a tin can to buy a bus ticket for a scholarship interview in Portland. I did it all alone, but I wasn't afraid. Alone was what I knew. One spring afternoon, while repotting a fern, I got an email. Cornell University had accepted me with a full-ride scholarship for botany. I stood there, surrounded by the hum of sprinklers and the sweet scent of hyacinths, my eyes burning with tears. Rose hugged me so tight I could feel her heartbeat. "You're going places, Olivia," she said. It was the first time I cried from joy, from knowing someone was proud of me. That night, I showed Mom the acceptance letter. She glanced at it, then set it on the counter. "That's great, honey," she said. "But don't tell Nathan. He's stressed about his finals." I nodded, folded the letter, and slipped it into my pocket. Downstairs, Nathan was laughing about his new gaming console, a gift from Dad for working hard. Weeks later, the family threw a party because Nathan got a B in history. Mom hung his test on the fridge, calling it a milestone. I looked at it, then at my scholarship letter, now tucked away in my dresser. That's when I knew, no matter what I did, I'd always be the kid who didn't need help. Nathan, no matter how little he tried, would always be the one they celebrated. But I had Cornell. I had a way out, and I swore I'd become someone they couldn't ignore. One day, while sorting seeds at the nursery, I found a packet labeled Rare Coastal Sage. Rose said it was nearly extinct, but if tended right, it could thrive. I kept it, not knowing why, just feeling it was special. That sage became my secret, a promise of something bigger waiting for me. Cornell was my escape, my chance to build a life where I wasn't defined by Nathan's shadow. I chose botany not just because I loved plants, but because it was mine. A world where no one could take away what I created. Those lecture halls, filled with talk of ecosystems, medicinal plants, and evolutionary biology, brought me back to Grandma Beatrice's attic, where I'd first fallen in love with dog-eared botany books. I'd sit in class scribbling notes about how a single seed could survive centuries, waiting for the right moment to grow. It felt like a metaphor for me. I graduated with honors, but no one from my family came to the ceremony. Mom said Nathan had a therapy appointment and Dad had to work. I walked across the stage alone, clutching my diploma, the weight of it heavier than I expected. Afterward, I landed a job at a small botanical research lab in Seattle, analyzing plant compounds for potential medical uses. While my classmates chased high-flying jobs at biotech giants, I was content in a cramped lab, peering through a microscope at leaf cells, the faint hum of fluorescent lights my only company. I didn't care about glamour. I cared about the plants. Quiet, overlooked, but full of secrets waiting to be unlocked. One day, while studying samples from a Pacific Northwest forest, I stumbled across that coastal sage I'd found at Rose's nursery years ago. It was listed as nearly extinct, but I felt a pull, like it was calling me. I spent months analyzing it, working late into the night, my desk littered with coffee cups and scribbled notes. Then I found it, a compound in its leaves that showed promise as an anti-inflammatory. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even my lab supervisor. It was too precious, too personal. But when I finally presented my findings, backed by data and test results, the lab erupted. The compound was real, and the lab secured a $75,000 zero-cents grant to keep researching. My name appeared in an internal memo. Olivia's discovery is groundbreaking. I read those words over and over, my chest tight with pride. That sage changed everything. I started noticing other plants others dismissed, mosses, weeds, forgotten herbs. I'd spend hours cross-referencing their properties, digging through old botanical journals. One time I identified a lichen mislabeled as worthless. It turned out to contain a rare antioxidant. Another time, a wildflower passed off as common was a cousin to a 19th century medicinal plant. My supervisor, Dr. Susan, pulled me aside one day over lunch, her fork hovering over a salad. "Olivia, why are you still here?" she asked. I laughed, thinking she was joking. Me? The girl who lives on instant noodles and second-hand sweaters? She leaned forward, eyes sharp. Exactly. The ones who start with nothing find the rarest treasures. Her words stuck like sap on my skin. I started taking freelance projects, small gigs for local farms, herbalists, even a museum needing plant authentication. I charged less than the big firms, but I was meticulous, testing every sample down to its molecular structure. One night, in my tiny apartment with a leaky faucet, I opened Grandma Beatrice's old botany journal. On the first page, in her looping handwriting, she'd written, "It's not the plant that's rare. It's the person who sees its worth." I knew then, if I'd been invisible at home, every plant I studied was how I'd make myself seen. At 28, I founded Verdant Roots, my own company named for the green of life and the roots of resilience. I didn't tell anyone, not that they asked. My family thought I was drifting, working some dead-end job playing with plants. I rented a shoebox office in Seattle above a noisy diner, with a desk I propped up with old books and a lamp that flickered like it was as unsure as I was. The early days were brutal. Long hours, skeptical clients, and a bank account that barely covered rent. But I kept going, authenticating rare plants for small businesses, analyzing compounds for local pharmacies, always chasing the next discovery. Slowly, word spread. A farmer recommended me to a regional herb supplier. A museum hired me to catalog a collection of preserved seeds. Then came calls from bigger players, pharmaceutical companies, conservation groups, even a national botanical garden. By year 3, I moved to a proper office with a glass door and a real sign. I hired Caleb, a recent biology grad with a knack for spotting rare spores. I taught him how to test plant extracts under UV light, how to trace a species' history through old records, and most importantly, how to trust his gut. By year 6, Verdant Roots had offices in Seattle, Portland, Denver, and Chicago. We worked with global drug companies, authenticated plants for million-dollar conservation projects, and specialized in reviving forgotten species from dusty archives. My net worth hit $15 million, $800,000 0 cents, not counting pending contracts worth millions more. I still lived in a modest townhouse, drove a plain silver hatchback, and used a cracked phone from 3 years ago. Not because I was cheap, but because I didn't need to prove anything. My wealth was in the work, in the plants I'd brought back to life. My family had no clue. To them, I was Olivia, the stubborn daughter who refused a real job, always too busy digging in dirt to make Sunday dinners. I still went to those dinners, listening to Mom gush about Nathan's latest plan. He was on his 6th college major, now marketing, and finally finding his path. Dad would suggest I apply for a teaching job because it's stable. I'd smile, say little, and pass the mashed potatoes. No one noticed the pendant I wore, a gift from a botanical society, or the ring from a museum curator. They assumed it was thrift store junk. I didn't correct them. I started sending money to my parents in my 4th year of business. First $3,000, 0 cents a month, then $5, 0 cents, then $8, 0 cents when Nathan's tuition spiked after switching majors again. Mom called one evening, her voice soft. "Nathan's chasing his dreams, but NYU's expensive and your dad's salary can't cover it." I was reviewing a $600, 0 cents contract, but I nodded like we were talking about grocery bills. "How much?" I asked. $8,000, she said. "Just until Nathan graduates. He'll take care of us all." I didn't point out that Nathan hadn't finished a single program in 8 years. I set up an automatic transfer labeled family support, telling myself it wasn't about them deserving it. It was about me being able to give. I kept my success hidden, not out of shame, but because I knew my family wouldn't see it for what it was. To them, I was Olivia, the oddball who messed around with plants, probably scraping by on their scraps. Sunday dinners proved it. Mom would ramble about Nathan's latest big idea. He was now studying marketing at NYU, his 6th major in 8 years, and so close to breaking through. Dad would nod, then turn to me, suggesting I get a job at the local community college for good benefits. Nathan would smirk, tossing out lines like, "Liv, you ever gonna do something real with all that dirt you play with?" I'd smile, sip my water, and let it slide. No one asked what I did. No one noticed the silver pendant I wore, a gift from a botanical conference, or the faint calluses on my hands from years of lab work. They thought I was stuck, and I let them. But I wasn't stuck. Verdant Roots was thriving, with contracts stacking up and a net worth of $15,800,000, 0 cents. I sent my parents $8,000, 0 cents a month, never mentioning it, never expecting thanks. They thought it was Dad's overtime or some miracle. I didn't correct them. It was easier to stay invisible than to face their questions or their demands. Still, I went to those dinners, sat at the same worn table, and listened to Nathan brag about his new sneakers or his stressful semester. I'd nod, pass the gravy, and keep my world locked away. That changed at Thanksgiving. I hadn't planned to host. I wanted to slip away, maybe hike a forest trail and breathe air that didn't carry expectations. But Mom called a week before, her voice thin. "I'm not feeling great, Olivia. No one's up for cooking this year. You know how much we love the holiday." I knew. They loved a feast they didn't have to prepare, but they'd notice if I didn't show. I paused, then said, "I'll handle it. Rest up." I hired a top-tier catering service from Seattle, the kind I used for Verdant Roots galas. Their menu was art. Herb-crusted lamb, roasted root vegetables, desserts that looked like sculptures. I paid with my company card. No one asked how. They assumed I knew someone who owed me a favor. Thanksgiving morning, I arrived at my parents' house early. The catering team rolled in with silver trays, portable ovens, and a table designer who arranged linens like they were painting a canvas. Nathan caught sight of them and muttered to Mom, Olivia's overdoing it, trying to show off for someone. I smiled. Show off? I had no one left to impress. I just wanted one meal that didn't taste like obligation. No dry turkey, no lumpy mashed potatoes. The house filled with nearly 20 people. Grandma Beatrice, aunts, uncles, cousins, Nathan with his new girlfriend. They gasped over the food, piling their plates high. I stayed quiet, pouring wine, keeping the peace. Halfway through dinner, I slipped upstairs to my old room. A client in Tokyo was bidding on a rare seed collection I'd authenticated, and I needed to monitor the auction. I opened my laptop, connected to my assistant Caleb via Bluetooth, and watched the numbers climb. I couldn't afford a distraction. Then Nathan barged in, no knock. "Got a phone charger? Mine's dead," he said, eyes already glued to my screen, where graphs and figures glowed. His face shifted, surprise, then a sly grin. "Whoa, let's show everyone how fancy your plant stuff is." Before I could stop him, he grabbed the laptop and strode to the dining room. "Hey everybody, check out what Olivia's hiding," he called, spinning the screen. Silence hit like a slam door. The display showed my bank account. $15,800,000.00. Open tabs revealed a $600,000.00 research contract and a quarterly report with $5 million.00 in revenue. A fork clinked against a plate. Mom laughed nervously, swallowing a bite of stuffing. "Come on. Olivia's probably just managing someone's account, right, honey?" I took a deep breath, smoothed my sweater, and stepped forward. "No, Mom. That's mine. I'm the CEO of Verdant Roots. We have 4 offices, working with global companies on plant research and medicine. It's all real." A glass tipped over. Aunt Clara's mouth fell open. Dad's face flushed, sweat beading on his forehead. Nathan gripped the table, his voice sharp. "You've got that kind of money and never said a word? Mom and Dad are drowning in debt for me. I'm still in school." I looked at Mom. "I've been sending you $8,000.00 a month for 3 years. You never asked where it came from." Her face went white. Dad slammed his hand down. 3 years? Nathan's eyes narrowed, but then he smirked, leaning back. "Wait, I knew you were doing well. A guy I met at a bar last year, some lab nerd, mentioned you'd hit it big. I just didn't know it was this big." My room spun. "He knew?" My stomach twisted. "You knew I was successful and still let Mom and Dad think I was a failure? Still took the money I sent?" Nathan shrugged, unapologetic. "You never offered more." "Family shares? Live?" Mom cut in, voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell us, Olivia? We're struggling, and you're sitting on millions." Dad's voice boomed. "You let us think you were barely getting by. That's not what family does." I looked around at their faces, angry, greedy, like I was a vault they'd just cracked. Nathan's girlfriend chimed in. "You could at least help Nathan start his real estate firm. He's got vision." I steadied myself, voice low but clear. "I've paid for Nathan's tuition, his vacations, his entire life for years. Family doesn't mean carrying people who step over you." Nathan laughed, bitter. "You're just mad because you were always second best. Poor Olivia, always in my shadow." That was it. The truth wasn't their pride. It was their excuse to take. The dining room was a battlefield, the air thick with accusations and the clatter of untouched plates. Nathan's words, admitting he'd known about my success for a year and still took my money, hung like smoke. My family's eyes weren't filled with pride or even surprise. They were hungry, like I was a prize they'd been cheated out of. Mom's voice cracked as she leaned forward. "Olivia, you've got millions, and you let us struggle? Do you know how hard it's been for Nathan?" Dad's face was red, his fists clenched. You hid this from us, from your own family. That's betrayal. Nathan crossed his arms, his smirk gone, replaced by a scowl. You owe us, Liv. I'm your brother. You can't just sit on that cash while I'm grinding through school. I stood there, the weight of their words pressing against my ribs, but something inside me snapped. I'd spent years swallowing their dismissal, their neglect, but I was done. Oh, you? I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I've sent $8,000, 0 cents a month for 3 years. Every time you called Mom saying you couldn't make ends meet, I sent it. No questions, no conditions. I paid for Nathan's tuition, his spring breaks, that fancy watch he's wearing, and this is how you thank me? Mom's mouth opened, but no words came. Dad looked away, his jaw tight. Nathan shifted, then muttered, You could have given more. You're loaded. I laughed, short and sharp, the sound cutting through the room. More? Nathan, you knew I was successful. You knew, and still let Mom and Dad think I was some loser living off their scraps. You let me carry your life while you played the victim. His eyes flickered, and for a moment I saw something, guilt maybe, or shame. Then he leaned forward, voice low. You want to talk about victims? I've been jealous of you, okay? That accident when we were kids? You tried to grab me, yelled for me to stop. I didn't listen, and I got hurt. Everyone praised me for surviving, but you? They barely noticed you tried to save me. I hated that you were the hero, and I was just the broken kid. The room went still. His confession hit me like a wave, cold and heavy. All these years I'd carried the guilt of that day, thinking I'd failed him. But he'd known I tried, and instead of gratitude, he'd resented me. I looked at him, my brother, and saw a stranger. You hated me for trying to save you, I said, and you punished me by letting them forget me. Mom's hands shook as she reached for me. Olivia. That's not true. We were just focused on Nathan. You were always so strong. I turned to her, my voice breaking. Strong? I was a kid, Mom. I needed you. I brought home awards, got perfect grades, begged for you to see me. But it was always Nathan's tired, Nathan's hurting. Do you even remember my high school graduation? You didn't come because Nathan had a soccer banquet. Dad's face crumpled, but he said nothing. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We didn't mean to, she started, but I cut her off. You didn't mean to, but you did. And now, the second you find out I've made something of myself, you're not proud. You're angry I didn't hand it over. Nathan jumped in, voice rising. You're twisting this. I'm shocked, okay? You hid everything. You didn't trust us. I met his gaze. You never trusted me. You told your friends I was mooching off Mom and Dad when I was paying for your entire life. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and tapped a few buttons. I just canceled the transfers. The room erupted. Mom gasped, Olivia, you can't. We need that money. Dad shouted, this is your family. You don't walk away. Nathan's girlfriend piped up, you're so selfish. Nathan deserves a chance. I set the phone down, my heart pounding but clear. I've been on my own since I was 10. If I can do it, you can too. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. Mom's voice followed, desperate. Olivia, please, think about your brother. I paused, hand on the knob, and looked back. If the only reason you want me is my money, I'm done buying your love. I walked out, the heavy door slamming behind me. Whispers exploded. Someone mentioned a lawyer, someone said I'd regret it. But as I stepped into the cold November air, all I felt was relief, like a plant finally breaking through concrete. The moment I closed the door on that Thanksgiving dinner, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just relief. It was clarity, like the fog lifting off the Oregon coast at dawn. I'd spent my life trying to earn a place in my family, but they'd never offered me one. Not really. As I drove away, the streetlights blurring through my windshield, my phone buzzed relentlessly. I didn't look at it until I got back to my townhouse. The screen was a flood of messages. Mom's first. Olivia, you're making this worse. We need to talk. Nathan's falling apart. Dad's colder. I don't know who you've become, but this isn't family. Nathan sent a string of texts, the last one venomous. You'll regret this. You're nothing without us. I powered off the phone and set it face down, as if that could silence the storm. By morning, the harassment spilled over. My company's inbox filled with emails from cousins, uncles, even Dad's fishing buddy's wife, who once called me sweet but not too bright. They demanded explanations, apologies, money. Nathan posted a cryptic Instagram rant full of old photos, me as a toddler in his lap, us at my 16th birthday, captioned, "Some people forget where they came from." The comments were a split. Half called me heartless, half questioned why a 37-year-old student was playing victim. I didn't respond. I couldn't keep fighting for people who saw me as a paycheck. I called James, a lawyer who'd handled estate disputes for my clients. I handed him a folder of screenshots, texts, emails, Nathan's post. His face stayed calm, professional. "You need a clean break, Olivia," he said. Financially, legally, emotionally. That day he drafted cease and desist letters to every name on the list, demanding they stop all contact, threats, or financial requests. I asked him to add one line, plain and human. Love doesn't come with a price tag. The letters went out, and I felt a weight lift, like pruning a diseased branch to save the tree. Grandma Beatrice was the only one I didn't block. I called her the next day, my voice shaky as I spilled everything, the dinner, Nathan's betrayal, the money I'd sent. She listened, her breathing steady on the line. "You did what you had to," she said finally, her voice firm but warm. "I've known you were special for years, Olivia, not because of your money, but because of your heart." Then she paused, and the twist came. I saw an article about verdant roots in a science magazine 2 years ago. I knew it was you. I didn't say anything because you needed to find your own way. I sat there, stunned, a lump in my throat. She'd known, and she'd let me shine without asking for anything. I invited Beatrice to stay with me for a while. She arrived with a small suitcase and a tin of her famous ginger snaps. We sat in my living room, sorting through a new shipment of preserved plant samples from Peru, her fingers still nimble as she pointed out a rare fern. She smiled, eyes crinkling, like she'd been waiting her whole life to see me like this. Free, whole. Those days with her were a balm, reminding me family could mean love, not obligation. I took bigger steps to protect myself. I changed my phone number, scrubbed my personal address from Verdant Roots records, and instructed my receptionist to bar anyone claiming to be family without an appointment. I signed a lease for a new company headquarters in a secure Seattle complex, complete with guards and biometric locks. Verdant Roots grew stronger through it all. A pharmaceutical giant hired us to develop a new plant-based drug. A European Botanical Institute invited me to co-lead a project on 18th-century medicinal herbs. I hired 2 new researchers, expanded our Chicago office, and signed contracts with global conservation groups. One morning, James called as I sipped coffee, reviewing a grant proposal. "It's quiet now, at least legally," he said. I smiled, but I knew their silence wasn't peace, it was resentment. That was fine. I didn't need their approval anymore. I just needed to be me, unapologetically. I moved into a new home in Seattle's outskirts, a sleek mid-century house overlooking Puget Sound, quiet and private. I set up my office myself, a warm oak desk, a soft leather chair, and a shelf of botanical journals that smelled like Beatrice's attic. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking to fit someone else's story. Sitting in my new office, the Seattle skyline soft through the window, I finally feel like I belong to myself. Grandma Beatrice once told me, a rare plant doesn't need to bloom loudly to prove its value, it just needs to grow where it's seen. I was that plant, buried under my family's expectations, but I found my light. I don't carry the weight of their neglect anymore. I don't wake up wondering how to earn their love. I've built a life where I'm enough, and that's more than I ever dreamed as a kid sketching wildflowers in my room. One evening, while cataloging samples, I found that coastal sage from Rose's nursery, the one that sparked my career. Its tiny, silver-green leaves still held a faint scent of the ocean. I'd kept it all these years, not for its market value, but for what it meant. The moment I started believing in myself, I placed it in a small clay pot on my office shelf, a reminder that my journey began not with applause, but with being forgotten. I wrote a note and tucked it beneath, "For the girl who felt unseen, you grew into a forest no one could ignore." I got an invitation last month to speak at a global botany conference in Geneva. I didn't hesitate. I'm going as Olivia, CEO of Verdant Roots, wearing the silver pendant from that botanical society and the quiet pride of someone who was once overlooked but never lost her roots. I'm not afraid of taking up space anymore. My family's voices, Mom's pleas, Dad's anger, Nathan's resentment, can't reach me here. They taught me what family isn't, but Beatrice showed me what it could be. Love that asks nothing in return. There's something else. I'm working on a new project, a compound from that coastal sage that might transform chronic disease treatment. It's still a secret, but if it succeeds, it could change millions of lives. That's my truth now, not the money, not the fight, but the chance to leave a mark that matters. I used to think I needed my family to see me. Now I know, the only validation I need is the one I give myself.